All right, we're going to start with economic policy then. So this will be 6 slides, I think, as well. So we start with kind of an introduction. These are all um, rhetorical questions, so you don't have to write these questions down on this slide. Just give you an idea. We're going to talk about who in the federal government can make the economy strong, who makes those decisions, who is or was or whenever will be responsible for recessions, to what ends, why does the federal government ever have a budget deficit, things like that, and do most Americans trust government to protect their economic interests? That all has to do with policy. So we'll start with some definitions, and a lot of this, between this and when we get through economic policy, a lot of it will sound like econ if you've taken econ, or if you're taking econ now, or if you're taking macro or whatever. A lot of this will sound familiar, but we need to know it as well here. So, definitions: deficit, the result of when government in 1 year, very, very important, right? 1 year spends more money than it takes in from taxes, spends more than revenue in 1 year. That is the deficit. Um, the next one is the debt. This is where you will now know more than the average American, because most Americans you cannot have a conversation with and where they will understand the difference between deficit and debt. Okay, they constantly get them confused. The media constantly gets them confused, and they personally, I think they do that on purpose, but whatever. Um, so the national debt, the total of all deficits and surpluses from the first presidency to the present. So from Washington to a month into Biden, that is the national debt. When you add them all up, whether it's a deficit that's a negative, right, or a surplus that's a positive. Um, right now we're sitting somewhere, what, to 24, 25 trillion national debt, something of that nature. And then GDP, we'll talk about a little bit later. So gross domestic product, total of all goods and services, probably should say new or final, right? Goods and services produced during a given year, another term for a given year. Okay, quick, and this is just through 2013, so the red lines will be bigger and smaller as we approach, as we get to 2021. But that just gives you an idea from 1960 to 2013 where the deficits sit. And remember, when you add all those up, that's when you get the national debt. But you have to go all the way back to 1788 to get there, or 1789. All right, the politics of economic prosperity. So let's see. We got two different things. We talked about majoritarian and interest group politics in the last part of in that first intro thing we just did. So here we go, majoritarian politics. When we talk about that, we talk about pocketbook issues. Pocketbook issues mean how much money you have in your pocket. Okay. At the national level, a couple of ideas. The poorer people are, the more they worry about unemployment, which sort of makes sense, and they tend to vote more Democrat. The wealthier people are, the more they worry about inflation, which also makes sense, and they tend to vote Republican. Except, of course, if you remember from the last unit, or the last part of this unit, sorry, that we talked about ideology. At the ultra wealthiest level, they vote Democrat as well. All right, so again, we can divide this up by age as well. Older people worry about inflation, and that makes a lot of sense because the older you are, the more wealthy you are. So that sort of feeds into the prior statement. But also, the older you are, the more chance you are on a fixed income. Once you get to retirement, you're on a fixed income mostly, and inflation destroys you if you're on a fixed income because your dollar doesn't change, but the price of things go up, so your dollars are buying less. That is a very destructive event, inflation, when you are older and you're on a fixed income. Younger people, again, more worried about unemployment. That makes a lot of sense. Younger people are generally poor people overall. Wealth, the older you are, the more chance you've had to build wealth. That's why that happens. And more worried about unemployment, more worried about your job than perhaps something else. All right, that's at the national level. On the individual level, then we can talk about things as well. If you feel better off economically, pocketbook issues, how your wallet's doing, how your bank account's doing, you vote for the incumbent person or party. That is a general statement. That is generally true. Again, so it's opposite. If you feel economically worse, you can vote the opposite. Now that's, of course, for people who aren't ideologically tied, right? Who don't always vote conservative or Republican, or don't always vote liberal, Democrat. If you might be in that swing area, and this is where your choices might be made. What do politicians try to do? Here's the problem. They try to work in the short term. because their objective is to be elected. So if you're working to be elected in 2 years, you're not going to really care about Social Security very much going broke in 2040 because you got to be elected next time around. And so the right decision, the hard decision, might not be the one you make because you got to be elected short term. To avoid painful decisions, they try to avoid them, right? Cutting inflation means raising interest rates. Nobody wants to do that. So they sort of don't let them do that, right? They let the Federal Reserve do that, and they could just push it off on that and then complain about them. Oh, look what those Federal Reserve people did. It's not my fault. And again, poor economic conditions usually mean the president will lose. Ford lost, Carter lost, Bush 41 lost. But it didn't affect Obama, which is interesting enough. 2012, it did not affect Obama. He got elected even though the economy was poor. He got reelected, sorry, even though the economy was pretty poor. All right. So again, the politics of taxes and spending then. What do we want? We want lower taxes, right? And we want less debt. And we want all of those things. The problem for politicians is all those things generally can't be done. Everyone wants prosperity. However, we want continued or new spending on popular programs. So we want less money spent by government, but we want more money spent on the cool stuff. So we're in trouble. All that cannot be done. New programs probably require higher taxes. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants to really campaign on that, although sometimes they do. The solution, of course, is to raise taxes on the others. That's the minority, and again, not in the racial or ethnic sense. For instance, you want increased money spent on health? Tax the dirty, rotten, nasty smokers. They're the others. We can tax them. So what do? We tax cigarettes, right? That's what we're doing. A lot of things can be sin taxes, right? We tax alcohol, we tax tobacco, we tax gambling, we tax all sorts of things because those are the other people. Or like this, we can increase spending overall. Tax the rich. Tax the rich. They got all that money. They probably stole it from somebody. So tax the rich, right? We can do that. That's the idea. So economic theories. I'm going to go a little quicker now. We have three theories you have to understand. Monetarism. The root word is money. Libertarian or conservative types of ideologies go with this. This is using the money supply. This is what you learned about with the Federal Reserve in econ. That's called monetary policy. You have to make sure you do that right. Federal Reserve next to this as well. Monetary policy, using the money supply to control the economy. And so the idea then is slow, steady increase in money supply, reduce interest rates during recessions, things like that. Keynesianism, generally a liberal idea or a liberal ideology. People who are liberal follow this one more. That is demand side, very important. Demand side, okay? So stimulating demand. This is fiscal policy, what the government does. Again, a term from econ, right? Monetary policy is the Fed. Fiscal policy is the government. That's the policy of taxes and spending. So the idea here, government should play a role in stimulating demand. It's demand side. Deficit spending or tax cuts when demand is low means stimulating demand by getting money into the economy and buying stuff. That's the taxes, the government doing that. That's when demand is low. That would be a recession. This part never really happens for Keynesians, yeah, whatever. You're supposed to cut taxes, cut spending, or raise taxes when demand is too high. When the economy is cooking along, you're supposed to raise taxes and cut spending. That part never really happens. Definitely don't need a balanced budget for Keynesians. They having a debt or a deficit, which adds to a debt, is no big deal to them, as long as you can service it. And then the last one is supply side. So this is a more conservative idea. This came about in the early 80s. It is also, of course, fiscal policy, though, right? Because the government is doing it. This is less government interference. Again, that goes with the conservative ideology, right? Tax cuts create incentives to work, to save, to invest. This is the whole idea. That will create then more jobs. So it's stimulating the supply side. So investments will create new jobs, will create better jobs. So more people will be working, so there'll be more money in the economy. You'll get raises, so there'll be more money in the economy. When people get money, they spend money. That's what we do, right? So the more money put in this way through the supply side will increase government revenue. So all this equals greater productivity, more overall tax revenue. So the idea is you can lower taxes to a certain rate, and you can actually get more revenue, because that's the whole point, right? The whole point of taxes is revenue to the government. So if you can, the supply siders say, you can lower taxes to a certain point, it will create all of this other stuff on the supply side. More people will have more money. That will then create more demand. Then we will buy stuff, and the economy will go up, and we will get more tax revenue as well. All of that feeds into the end. Okay, So that's it for this part. We will pick up on econ policy next time around. However, between now and then, remember we do have, so it'll be this Thursday and Friday, we do have a summative FRQ for a SCOTUS comparison. So be ready for that. That's coming up, and that'll all be in the planner. We'll write that up for you and everything else. So we'll see you next time around. Have a great one. Hope you enjoyed the Cold War.